As your favorite entertainment media becomes more successful and popular, it only makes sense for the investors and the corporations as a whole to expand upon its success. One of the ways to expand your success is through the means of appealing to a broader audience. This is something that companies, especially those focused on producing entertainment, will do. But while this is a sensible move on paper for a lot of companies out there, it's not always a good one, and I hope that this video can expand on the reasons why, because we have one game that provides a great example of this. Now before we get started, YouTube might demonetize this video, so if you'd like to support my work, you can do so by checking the links down below. When you make a certain product in mind, you're gonna need to have a good picture of the kinds of audiences that you're gonna appeal to. Is this film made for kids, or is it made for both kids and adults in mind? Is this game made for the Japanese audiences, or is it made for the Western audiences, or both? Is this game made for people who enjoy video games, or is it made for people who just want to have their ideologies endorsed? Unfortunately, companies these days, especially the big ones, have a mindset that they can appeal to multiple people at the same time without requiring too much effort. They're going to go so far as to appeal to two people who have completely different tastes, and doing so doesn't always go very well. I think I've made this analogy before in the past. They're going to make something that people who like orange juice and apple juice like, and they do that by boiling down both products to its most basic form, as in water, as in it has no taste at all, and in worst case scenario, they're going to boil it down and mix them together so lazily that it turns into the most disgusting thing that you'll ever drink. Now that's not to say that it's impossible to appeal to both audiences at the same time. It is possible to make a product that will appeal to people who like pretty anime boys and pretty anime girls at the same time, but there needs to be proper care being put towards those products, and sometimes those two audiences might clash because they have different tastes. I remember on many occasions the online banters between the elitist Fire Emblem Classic Hard Mode guys and the normal casual guys who just want to enjoy the story, and some classic hard guys are disappointed that the game is way too easy on the hardest difficulty. Point is, you can't always please everybody. You can try, but it doesn't always work. At the very least, if you're going to appeal to as broad of an audience as possible, you're gonna need to be able to answer the basic questions. Who is this product made for? How are you going to make that product for those people? And this leads me to a game with a very confused target demographic, Tokyo Mirage Session, a game that I played for about an hour at this point. I played the unpatched WiiU version of that game on the CMU emulator in my brand new laptop with the uncensored patch link down below. For the record, the game ran surprisingly well, aside from a couple of glaring visual glitches and the game having to load the shaders every single time something new came up on screen, which is probably why people are posting their case online. If you've been following my channel since 2016, first off, thank you very much, and second, you might remember me talking about this game quite a lot. Those were my youthful, naive days. For the record, I was 19 at the time, and I'm not so familiar with two franchises that the game crosses over, as in Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem. But as time went on, I actually became more familiar with them and even becoming a fan of the Shin Megami Tensei franchise and enjoying the games from the Fire Emblem franchise. So with that, I just want to say how confused I am on the demographic of this game, as in, who is this game made for? Is this game made for JRPG fans in general, fans of Shin Megami Tensei, or Fire Emblem, or both? But we're getting ahead of ourselves. What is this game about exactly? And why does this game cause a lot of scorn from people back then and, well, just recently? Well, let's start from the very beginning. Tokyo Mirage Session is a JRPG that has elements of Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem. It focuses on the story of Tsubasa, a girl who has to witness what would happen if Thanos snapped his fingers at an entire opera house. It's probably because he heard the Fire Emblem theme in an Atlas game and got confused for a second. So this girl, who looks like a younger version of Maya from Persona 2, is actually not who you're playing as, a missed opportunity for Atlus to have another playable female character. Instead, you're playing as generic shonen protagonist number 451 Itsuki, who unlike the Persona protagonist, has a voice and his own defined character. He found Tsubasa secretly joining the idol contest, but the contest turned into a nightmare as the host became a monster and began abducting the contestants and terrorizing people left and right. As Itsuki tries tries to rescue Tsubasa, he somehow managed to convert some of these weird ghastly demons so that they can turn into his Mirage, which turns him into a Persona user, a Mirage master. As they merge with their Mirages, they also have their own transformation sequence with their own unique costumes. And I suppose this is where Atlus gets the idea that the characters should just have costumes that correspond with their magical companions, as opposed to just fighting them in plain clothes. From the summary and how the game presents itself, the average gamers who prefer Western video games might be thinking, wow, this game is so unapologetically anime. It makes me cringe. And for those who are familiar with Japanese entertainment in general, especially the Persona series, you might be thinking, wow, that's a plot that I've heard a million times already. And that's the reason why this game didn't perform very well. This collaboration between Atlus and Nintendo would have costed them quite a lot. The game looks pretty, it has great animation, tons of songs, and 2 IP rights, so this game has to be very expensive to make, and yet it only sold 50,000 copies in the US, which is actually a lot more copies than how they were sold in Japan. When you compare that sales number to something like Lego City Undercover, which sold around 1 million copies, that's really not much, and this is a game coming from powerhouses like Atlus and Nintendo. Is it because the game was on the Wii U and therefore it didn't sell very well? Maybe, and here's an interesting fact. The Wii U actually sold more in the US and other countries than they do in Japan. That's why they have to sell this game abroad, because that's where people mostly own the consoles. Would the Switch release help matters even further? I'm not really sure, to be honest. The Switch is a very popular platform and the game did get advertised on Direct, but whether or not that version would be successful is pure speculation at this point, and I don't particularly care about the sales of that version, to be honest. If it does sell very well, that's great. If not, too bad. Since the game performed rather poorly in Japan, and since the Wii U platform itself sells better outside, that's why the game was localized. That's the reason why there are tons and tons of changes being made towards the game, to the point of chapters being straight up redone. When the news of the game's censorship began in around 2016, and recently as well, people such as myself are pissed. It's totally unfair that the Western audiences didn't get the same thing as the Japanese audiences. So many people want to experience the game just as how the Japanese audiences experienced it, but Nintendo has a different approach. Let me clarify once again that there are 2 versions of the game, the Untamed original version and the localized Western version. The restoration patch does what it does and restore a lot of the game's original content, and yet for some reason Nintendo decides that the best version to sell to the rest of the world, including Japan, is the version that got butchered, which caused them to apologize for misleading the Japanese audiences and offer refunds to them. This has gone to the point where the Japanese audiences can't take it anymore and just straight up buy the Wii U version that topped the Amazon sales chart. This game also serves as a good example in how console exclusivity can kill a game's success, or at least a console exclusivity to a platform that doesn't sell very well. Thanks to the game being a Nintendo property, it has to be shackled on a Nintendo console, even though the game's primary turn-based combat mechanics are largely similar to Persona. The Persona series, in case you missed it, are more successful in the PlayStation consoles. Sure, the Shin Megami Tensei games have been on the Nintendo platforms before, but it's the Persona audiences that this game is clearly trying to grasp. Unfortunately, Tokyo Mirage Session is the closest thing to a Persona game that Wii U owners can have, and I do feel that they deserve a lot better than this. When hearing about the news that the Switch version of the game will retain the changes happening in the Western version, I initially felt hopeless of the future of Japanese games. Nintendo and Atlus are big companies who are already stepping their bounds into the Western market, and they're going to make changes into their games just so that they can appeal to them. But after thinking about it for a while, after digging a little bit more info about this game, after actually playing the game for a bit, I realized that this is less of a morality issue and more of a business expansion issue. As I said before, companies are willing to expand their horizons and broaden their appeals to gain more success. Unfortunately, this game's entire concept is very difficult to market in the West, and that results in the game suffering from all of the aforementioned changes. The game sold better in America than in Japan, purely because America sold more Wii U units than in Japan. They have more owners of the platform platform in there, and that's why they need to localize the game so that they can sell them there. But even so, while the game didn't really bomb, it's nothing amazing. All the localization and the changes that happen in this game is because they recognize that this is a very niche game with a very niche appeal, and they have to do whatever it takes to hit that broader general audience. In result, we end up in really minor and confusing changes that only made the game to feel less raunchy, rather than actually making it more appealing to the Western audiences. Removing a couple of minor details in the game doesn't make the game more appealing, it only makes it less appealing. And we haven't even talked about how the game straight up redone an entire freaking chapter. But since this game was designed for a very specific niche audience in mind, I doubt that not making these localization changes would make it to sell more. Maybe a couple thousand copies, but what you viewers need to understand is that gamers in general don't care about hooplas like this. They care about whether or not the game is good or looks good. They don't pay too much attention to the news. I mean, Borderlands 3 is a game that has tons and tons of hoopla surrounding it, such as 2K straight up sending private investigators to a YouTuber and ruining his career, and yet the game sold incredibly well regardless, because the game is a legitimately fun looter shooter. That's what people are looking forward to, and they delivered. I talk about censorship of a lot of games, and most of them are games that I'm not that interested in. Omega Labyrinth Life, for example, isn't really my type of game. Senran Kagura, for example, isn't really my type of game. I talk about the censorship of those games because I don't like censorship in general, and I want people to experience video games just as how they were supposed to be experienced. It's the same case with Tokyo Mirage Session. The game as a whole is just not that interesting for me. Even after being a fan of Shin Megami Tensei and being more familiar with Fire Emblem, and playing the game for an hour only cements my interest even further. It didn't leave a particularly good first impression. The game's censorship and whether or not I'm interested in the actual product are two different matters at hand. Speaking as someone who is anti-censorship, my criticism towards the game is that the localization changes are ridiculous and only butchers the experience. Speaking as a gamer, a fan of Shin Megami Tensei, and someone who likes the Fire Emblem games, even if you revert those localization changes, I'm still not sold by this game because it's simply not something that I'm particularly interested in playing. I'm not sold by the game's overall theme and story. It's just not for me. Now that does sound particularly entitled, doesn't it? Why are you criticizing a game that you're not that interested in the first place? Simple, really. I don't like censorship, and I don't want it to happen to the people who are interested in this game. And the thing is, I don't ask this game to cater to me. Of course, it's ridiculous to ask a game to cater it to someone who aren't interested in the game in the first place. I ask the game to cater into the audiences that it wants to cater to, which is why I ask the question, who is this game made for? I've been in a position of the people who are interested in this game. There are times where I felt that games that I'm interested in got censored or butchered. I criticize the localization because these people are experiencing the same thing that I have experienced before. I am advocating for people who are interested in this game to have their game not censored. I believe that they don't want their games to be censored. That's why I complain. That's where the criticisms are coming from. It doesn't really matter on who complained about it. The censorship is still stupid. And that's where I'm gonna wrap it up for today. The moral of the story is, have a target demographic. Make up your mind on the kinds of people that are interested by your product. You can't always please everybody. You can try, but you have to be very careful. You can't just phone it in. Unfortunately, Tokyo Mirage Session phoned it in. It's a game that has a very niche appeal, so niche that it's practically impossible for it to be appealing to everybody. Trying to make it more appealing to everybody and not put any sort of effort into it is the result of trying to appeal to people who like two different flavors of juice. If you don't do it right, either it's going to be just plain water or it's going to be the most disgusting thing that you have ever tasted.